Thanks everyone for joining our Zoom call. We're gathered all here today for change. That is the big goal. Name is Marvin O'Kello on behalf of the Halifax Wanderers. I'm hosting this discussion because I believe what happened to George Floyd should compel all of us to do everything we possibly can to stamp out racism, oppression, and discrimination forever. It's not good enough to say that this happened in the US, as it does happen in Canada and in Halifax on a lesser scale, but has the same similar effect to the Black community. So we have to bring about change in Halifax, Canada, and that's where I really want to start this conversation. I've been having discussions with our founder and president, Derek, and many of our colleagues at the Wanderers this past week about how we can try to bring about change. And one of our club's pillars is inclusivity, one of our 8 values. So we are together from ways at the Wanderers, and our differences make up our identity. So we really want to draw strength and unity from that during current events, and we've invited our entire community to be part of this call, and we have asked some of our staff, players, and fans to speak on the issue as we really want to show leadership and encourage others to lead on this topic in their respective departments and fields. I personally believe that it does take a community to raise a child, and I was raised by many of the people on this call in the soccer community. I was coached by people like Stephen Hart, Masut Mert, Vote Deco, John Deco, Cindy Tai, just to name a few, since I've been involved in soccer in Nova Scotia. And I really want to thank every one of the coaches that I've had and the experiences that they've shared with me to make me the individual that I am today. So I'm going to open the floor first to Derek. And just a few housekeeping things. It is only going to be the people who are the initial hosts who are going to be unmuted, and everybody else is going to be just on mute. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the chat, and we'll try to get through some of them later on there. So, Derek, we'll begin with you. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's so great to see everybody's face on this group. I'm really excited that the hair salons and barbers are going to open back up soon.
Agreed. I got my appointment set for tomorrow, so I'm excited as well.
But thank you, Marvin. You know, it's great that you took the lead on kind of looking to create something like this as a forum for discussion. And I know you've been a great a leader in our team in trying to kind of get us all talking and thinking, and I guess, and then for some of us, just helping us work through the confusion of, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, and, trying to say and do the right things, because I think it's it's obviously a very serious issue and something that everybody needs to take seriously, but it can be a very confusing one too, for those of us who feel like we, care about the right things and are trying to do the right things, but also maybe, in my case, I don't know what it's like. So it's a tough thing to know kind of what is the appropriate response. So it's great to have your leadership in trying to pull this together. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I do think it's important that, like you're doing, it's more important to do something and be involved in some capacity than to, really beat yourself up about how to. Just do something. Doing something is more important than what you do, in my opinion. So we'll start off with the first question, Derek. What went through your mind, when you were watching that video of what happened to George Floyd?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, the thing I thought about was how normal it looked to the police officer, and I think the unfortunate thing here, and likely why this is, finally boiling up as an issue, is I don't think that was his first time doing that.
No, it didn't seem like it.
Right. So there was a convergence of someone having a phone and filming it, and unfortunately, Mr. Floyd passing away, that created the issue. But it was very obvious that this was not something that police officer thought was anything out of the ordinary. And I think as I look at it anyway, that likely is the biggest issue. Is this happens way too often, and in this case, everything came together to make it a deadly encounter. But I don't think it's something that didn't happen. Who knows? Maybe hundreds of times before. And just this time it resulted in, unfortunately, someone dying. So yeah, that's what I really took away from it, was just the calmness and the normalcy of it was probably the most disturbing part, because that's not a normal action to take, yet it certainly didn't appear that he was in any way worried that it was going to turn into anything other than a normal day.
Yeah, it was a tough watch for everyone, I'm sure, especially everyone on here. You and I have been talking a lot over the past couple of days about what we can do collectively and how sport can help in the fight against racism. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I feel like this is why I thought this was a great idea, and why the conversations we have been really good. I just thinking myself, I grew up in sports. I played sports my whole life. I've had so many friends throughout my life who are Black, who to me it never seemed like it was a big deal, because I was used to always just having friends, and we just talked and we hung out, and there was nothing different about it. But now, in our conversations, I understand that's not enough, and it's more than just, thinking that it's normal and it's all okay, to actually trying to figure out how to deal with those people who don't think it's okay and normal, to just have a friend who's Black, and just, we hung out, and it was no big deal to me. And I think, at least I'll speak for myself. That's kind of what I find a little bit, just difficult with this, and how to respond is what are we supposed to do, and what are we supposed to say, and what are the right ways to support, the friends that we have. Because, I'm very well aware that I am, a straight white male. So I have very little experience of dealing with any kind of prejudice in my life. So, I have to understand that, and try to figure out how I can then help and have conversations and be a part of this, knowing that I really don't know what it's like in the least. Right?
Yeah, and that's fine. I think it's really important that we acknowledge where we're starting from, like you just did. You're a privileged white male, but acknowledging we also all have a job to do and going forward. And you've done a really great job of ushering the conversation and giving us a platform like this to discuss and see how we can move forward. So I really want to thank you for that, Derek, and we'll get back to you, I'm sure, later with a few questions from some people.
Sure, yeah.
So thanks for everything you've done to allow this to happen, and we'll hopefully continue to do.
For sure.
So next, we're going to be introducing one of our first supporters, the first actually ever, and one of our super fans. James Covey has been heavily involved in the club even before it was a club. So next, really happy that you chose to join this conversation and not be quiet, James. So any opening remarks before I jump into any questions there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I could just talk a little bit about kind of, where I'm coming from, my life experience, and kind of my vector in, if you like. I mean, I grew up in Halifax, and specifically in Spryfield. So I was part of a community that at the time had a lot of Black people living in it. And I can remember my parents teaching me specifically to treat everyone equally and not use racial slurs and all of those things. But I learned nothing about Black history or systemic racism or any of that stuff when I was young. I think I was 20 years old before I learned that, Nova Scotia isn't just a place that Black people escaped slavery, but also a place where slavery happened. So, just on from that point on a journey of learning, right? Yeah, no, as you say, I've been involved in the executive of the Privateers 1882 since we started to organize, really, and I was really honored to be chosen as the first member of the Wanderers Club.
Awesome. And even within your supporters group, I've seen quite a bit of diversity, with guys like Carolis and lots of female members, and I think it's a really great example of how inclusive our team and our community is. So thanks for jumping on. With expanding on that, how do you think that our fans and supporters groups respond to make our match days and being a Wanderers fan inclusive for all of us?
I mean, I think we're suddenly at a really powerful pivot point, I feel. So I feel like people can actually hear conversations now about systemic racism and how things like white supremacy are like baked into our social structures and those sorts of things. Like I do feel good about the fact that we have rules in our supporters group, against acts of racism and discrimination. But I think what I'm really thinking about a lot in the past few days is that to be truly anti-racist, we need to do more. So I feel like it's not enough to wait just for incidents to happen and sort of handle those as aberrations. Like, I feel like we need to strategize about how to counter like the way that systemic racism kind of rigs the game, and like I was listening to this week's episode of Down the Pub podcast, and really appreciated what you had to say, Marvin, and what Jan had to say. And I mean, you both had really awful incidents to tell us about, but and that was illuminating. But I also appreciated that you guys both talked about systemic issues, and Marvin, you were talking about how Black people do so much more work just to be accepted on ostensibly equal terms, and I appreciate what Jan had to say about how empty a word like solidarity can be. So I think I just all of that to say, I think we're in a moment where I think people are open maybe to just educating themselves on this stuff, and like, the report on street checks in Halifax came out more than a year ago, and like just this week I'm digging into it for the first time. I could have done that a long time ago, but just trying to learn, and yeah, I'm really proud of the fact that we have like half women and half men on the exec of Privateers. We have LGBTQ representation on our exec, but we don't have Black, Indigenous, or people of color on our executive, and I want to change that. So in my mind, it's about us doing the work to make people with those identities truly at home in our supporters group. And yeah, I think you're right. It's begun to happen. I also feel we know more fans now than when we started with a very small circle. So I feel like we're in a good position to start more conversations one-on-one and just, learn and gather ideas and figure out how to do that. And I feel like if we can reach that goal of having people on the exec, then that is the most powerful statement that our Black fans, our Indigenous fans, and all people of color are welcome in our group. So for me, that's the next step. I don't think it's enough to just declare the door open and wait for people to walk through it. I think there's work for us to do, and it's not right to just offload that.
Definitely some great points there. And some of the key things you said there I think are really important. You talked about anti-racism versus versus racism, and I think that's a really strong point. There is, especially right now with everything that's happening, it's important that people don't just say, I'm not racist, I have Black friends or something like that, which is something really common. And you do show with your actions that you actually are anti-racist, not just that you're not racist. So thanks for, you know, those points. Very important that you guys are even looking to acknowledge that, you know, you want to include more people in your supporters group, and there's actionable items that you can take to ensure that we don't repeat mistakes of the past. So thanks for that, James.
You bet.
So moving on to somebody who's I'm sure has been dealing with this his entire life. Stephen Hart is from the Caribbean, and he even has I'll allow him to tell more of his story, but we all know Stephen and love him for his his many quotes and many stories. So Steve, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So Steve, you've coached national teams here in Canada and Trinidad and Tobago, and you know, been all around the world with football. And why are we still having this discussion? And what do you think our team and sport and society in general can do in this fight against racism and for inclusivity?
Well, I was lucky enough to be brought up by parents where this was an open discussion and something we talked about openly. And they, you know, my parents didn't want to hear anything about seeing color. They brought us up to look at everybody as individuals, right? And I'm thankful for that. And then, of course, being raised in Trinidad and Tobago among different people of different ethnicity and religion, for that matter, it was sort of normal in the way that we grew up. And Jan will tell you we are not really the most politically correct people, and we speak fairly openly about racism. But the thing is, for me, it's all about education, right? And even when you look at something as simple as you know, Black history and the education process that goes with that, it's only really they only talk about things like slavery. They don't talk about the achievements, the scholars, the authors. I remember seeing the movie Hidden Figures and the story of Katherine Johnson, who calculated mathematically the trajectory for the landing of the Apollo 11 on the moon, who was of African descent, and the stories of Louis Latimer, who invented the filament for the light bulb. You don't get those sort of education of people who have achieved and contributed to the United States or to France or to Canada, for example. So it is systemic, right? And I personally believe that it's an education project. We're not going to get rid of racism. Let's not fool ourselves about that. But you can be better educated about it. And the way I look at it is that I cannot change the world, but I can change myself, right? And for me, it's about treating people with respect and really just trying to educate yourself on not only people of African descent, but native peoples, people of color in general, and understanding where those cultures come from.
Definitely agree. And the fact that those differences actually make us stronger and not the opposite.
Totally agree.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. And you did mention Jan, I'm sure is going to have some similar experiences, you know, being from Trinidad. So I'm sure we'll move on to him. Thanks a lot, Steve. That was powerful. I didn't even know some of those things that you just said. And I think that's why it's important that we continue to have these conversations so that, you know, we're all educated. I'm not going to claim to be the most educated person on the topic. And that's why it's great to have these chats. So Jan, how you doing, brother?
Hi, good afternoon. What's up, man?
Not too much. Thanks for joining again, and thanks for what you had to share on the podcast the other day was very powerful with what happened in Hungary, and we it was tough, I'm sure, to even share some of those experiences. I'm sure there's other ones that you can think of outside of that. So thanks for making yourself vulnerable. We really let's start with where you come from and your role on the team.
Well, again, come from Trinidad and Tobago, just like Stephen. I was a bit fortunate to the secondary school that I attended. Secondary school being what you go to in Trinidad from the age like 11 till 16, 17 years old. St. Anthony's College, and it's a school in Westmoreland. That's in the northwest of Trinidad, and it's where there are a lot of white people. So it's known as the white boys' school. That's what it's known as. And I remember on my first day of school, I went into school and the teacher was taking the roll call, and she called my name, John Michael. So I put my hands up. She looked. She called the name again, John Michael. I stood up. She called the name again. I shouted out, "Yes, miss, that's me." And she kind of murmured a little bit under her breath, "Isn't it a white person name?" And I was a bit surprised. This was me at 11 years old.
Wow.
I wasn't too educated as to what was taking place. But needless to say, because of things dating back even to slavery in Trinidad and Tobago, there is a lot of, or there's heavy racism in Trinidad and Tobago. It is. Politically, there are two parties. One that the voters are predominantly people of African descent, and the others are people of white and East Indian descent. East Indian being the indentured laborers that they would have brought over after slavery was abolished in Trinidad and Tobago to take up jobs and to work the jobs that the slaves left behind after slavery was abolished. So, I mean, Stephen used the word normal, and it's sad, but as I mentioned, even on the podcast, there's certain things you could kind of turn a blind eye to and turn away to. You take it as, that's just normal things. And one of the things with this George Floyd situation that I was happy about is that it was able to be filmed. There was no stories to be told and nobody to imagine it could have gone differently. It was filmed, so everybody could see with their own eyes what was taking place, the injustice that was done. And the sad thing about it is this person lost their life, yes, but this is something that goes on probably on a daily basis, not only in places like the United States, but in Europe and all over the world. And again, it's sad, but I'm glad that the conversations are being had now, and we have this opportunity to kind of educate and to get people aware of what is taking place in the world.
Powerful words, man. And Garrett McPhee's been very vocal there in the chat. He's saying a lot of people define racism as when an individual consciously does not like people based on race and is intentionally mean to them, and that it's something only bad people do, and that this kind of thinking actually protects the system of racism, as racism is not an event, it is a system, and we all live in it. Those very, very, very accurate there, Garrett. And elaborating on that, Jan, what do you think the responsibility that everyone has at this point with current events, with what happened with George Floyd?
I have a daughter, so for me, I like to stress on leaders. Everyone is a leader. Now, the first person you're in charge of is yourself. And you have a responsibility, first and foremost, to try to get yourself educated about global events, things that are happening in the world. Even a situation like coronavirus, COVID-19, for example, if you don't educate yourself as to how to take preventative measures, how to protect yourself and your family, then you'll fail. You'll get the disease and you'll pose a threat to yourself and to people around you. It's no different with the racism situation. You have to educate yourself and you have to speak up. You can't allow, you can't see situations of racism taking place and you turn a blind eye to it because it is not directly affecting you. And I think with this generation that we have now, I think a lot of people use platforms like social media, for example, to come out and to push things that they believe in. And racism is a no-brainer. It's not black against white. It's not police against normal citizens. It's racist against everybody else. That's as simple as it is. And if you know you are not someone who stands for racism, you're not someone who pushes that mindset, then you have to defend it.
Completely agree, Jan. You know, there's a famous quote that if you don't choose any side, you're choosing the side of the oppressor. You know, so I think those you really capture those words and elaborate on them. So we'll get back to you in a little bit there. I'd like to hear from another one of our team's veterans at this stage. Alex Carolis returning on his second year back with the club, and he's become a fan favorite as well as a leader among the teams. So Alex, welcome.
Hey Marvin, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. And Alex, tell us where you're from and what your reactions are to what you're hearing so far tonight.
Yeah, so I'm from Sarnia, Ontario. It's a small city in southwestern Ontario. It's a very multicultural population of people from all over the place. I came from immigrant parents and grandparents as well. So when they came across, they've told me their stories of how they had to deal. So I kind of was brought up and raised to, cliche, but treat everyone how you would like to be treated. All my friends are from all different mixes of life. So I kind of grew up not seeing color, like everyone was equal in my eyes. So basically what everyone's been saying this past call is like, I'm agreeing with everyone. Like, it's just shocking for 2020 that this is still a discussion, I mean, this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years in North America alone. So it's just shocking that this is still having to be discussed, and I think what's always caught my attention, I just don't understand, is that like no one can choose what they're born into. Like, I can't choose where I was born, what color I am, what nationality I am. Like, that's just something you have no control over. So who's to say one's better than the other, right? Like, you're all exactly equal. And even like, look at North America, for example, all of us in our past generations, in our family's history, like no one came from here originally. Like, we all took this land from the Native Americans, Native Canadians. So like, none of us are fully Canadian, So yeah. That's always just blown my mind how racists can claim that it's their land and they're the best and whatever, like they claim. They're just not, like, it's just so uneducated and ignorant to think that. So it's just always been on my mind is how one can think like that, right? So I think George Floyd was the one who ended his life, but that was the one that everyone, their attention just drew to that, So I think now, like, you see everyone on social media, like the biggest of the biggest people with the biggest platforms, they're all expressing their beliefs. You're seeing protests that started in Minnesota, then Chicago, then Detroit, then all over America, and now it's all over Canada, and even the biggest cities in Europe and South America, everywhere. Like, every major city is now protesting this. So as unfortunate as it was for what happened to him, I mean, there's no words about that, but I think something like that everyone could see, because usually you hear stories and then you feel bad for a day or 2 days and then it kind of just slips out of your mind. But this one is just so like hard to watch, and like everyone saw the life go from him, right? So I think for a global perspective, everyone could see that and see just how wrong that is, and then they can relate that to where they're from and what's wrong in their areas. So I just think that the protests need to continue until change is happening. I don't know what kind of change that needs to be, but there definitely needs to be changes. And I think the main thing, I know Coach Steven said it as well, but just education. No one's born a racist. That's something you learn. Like, that's something you learn from your peers or whoever has influence over you. So if you educate kids to not be like that, then they're not going to be like that, you know? So I know it is a small minority that is racist, but that's too much. It can't be 1% of the population. It has to be 0, because in 2020, there's no place for it. So just education. I mean, I don't know how that needs to be done, but it needs to be done. I mean, I think now that everyone's talking about this, it's a good thing. So just.
What's the feeling among the team? You know, you're one of the leaders. Is this something that you think the whole team shares?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, we're still in small groups. We haven't seen everyone, but I mean, everyone's been shocked by it. I mean, it's been in our group chat, just kind of what's been going on. And we see Halifax is protesting downtown. So like, we've had guys talk about if they should go join that or whatnot. So I just think everyone sees it. Everyone is experiencing it in their own way. And I mean, there's not one person who thinks that like this is a good thing, a bad thing, you know? So I think it all just needs to be open dialogue.
Definitely. And, you know, I got an overwhelming amount of responses from, you know, many of the teammates and many of the guys. And it's great to see that response and realize, you know, that you guys aren't separate from the topic just because we're athletes. So thanks for joining, Alex. And hopefully.
And just one quick point, just because I know, I forget which reporter it is, but remember LeBron James spoke up about this a couple of years ago, and someone said, oh, just stick to dribbling or basketball or whatever. But I think athletes, especially elite athletes, they have a platform where they can express themselves because they have amassed to the millions. And I mean, we're not at that level, but we still have a good reach in our local communities. So I just think it would be very ignorant for a white person like myself just to stick to playing soccer and keeping my mouth shut, you know? Like, I could easily do that, but like, what good does that do for the world, right? I mean, I have a small little platform that I have, but if you got me speaking up and like these kind of things, then just that's what you need to be doing. And I think that's what the main celebrities are doing, and that's what needs to be happening. So
yeah, and you know, Dave mentioned in the comments there that LeBron did have another big exchange with that person today, and that lady's facing a lot of criticism, actually rightly so, because she did say LeBron, you know, that whole shut up and dribble, and then Drew Brees recently had some very interesting comments, and then all of a sudden she cared what Drew Brees had to say, and he was allowed to speak on the topic, and she wasn't giving him the same reaction that she gave to LeBron. So that right there spoke volumes, I think, about to everybody about how things are in America, and especially the fact that it was Fox. So don't want to dive too much into that, but thanks for coming on, Alex, and we appreciate the support, and keep doing what you're doing on and off the field. It doesn't go
Thanks, Marvin. Thank you.
So Carlos is our next speaker, and we're pleased he can join us. He's been with us from the start. He sitting in the 109, 108 section of the kitchen, always cheering, always with a beer in hand. So thanks for joining us, Carlos. It was a great chatting with you on the podcast and hearing what you had to say.
No, thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for like coming to the pod, because I feel like we got to address this, and this was a really serious matter. And it's sad that we have, unfortunately, to see somebody die to react. And sometimes something worse has to happen just to shake yourself up, and it shouldn't be like that, because we know the issue has been there always, but there's always something worse has to happen so people wake up and realize this is bad. And thank you for sharing.
Have to. Do you feel that it has to, or are you saying that it should?
I don't want to happen anymore. But unfortunately, it's sad, but like Floyd passed away, and this was a big awakening for everybody. But this is an issue that always has been there, and it shouldn't be like that. And
agreed.
But unfortunately, in this world, like always, we have to wait to somebody to die or something worse happen that we can actually be aware of it. And I'm being generic, but it shouldn't be like that. And yes, when you came to the pod, and thank to Anthony and Chris, because kudos to them, because they organize everything too, and they deserve a big credit in this one too. You and John share such a touching stories that it really, like, I'm really glad that I was able to hear them. But I feel like you and John, there's so many people out there in the world that had so many stories that has to be said, but they don't say it because, as we were mentioning, like, there's so many racism. Some people get banned. People live with this afraid, and it shouldn't be afraid. Like, you know, I grew up in a community, like, I'm from Peru, and it's a country in South America that has a lot of mixed background. My grandma was Black, so I grew up with Black, like, how do you say, like, Black Hispanic people all my life. And to me it was normal, and I was raised with this variety of people. And when I moved here to Canada, I've been here for 14 years, I feel like this is such a great country, because I know there's racism here, but there's countries that are worse. And I feel proud that here we're addressing, and I feel like, especially this community in Halifax, people were doing protests, rallies, and everything, because they want to be heard, you know? And I feel that it was such a joy seeing all these protests and see all this. I don't want to be so blunt to speak about this, but seeing white people and Black people mixing together just for one purpose, that was nice. And I feel like Floyd's death is gonna change many things around the world, many things how people see racism. But as I was saying, we don't need to wait until somebody dies to keep fighting for this.
I get what you're
like
saying.
This is the moment, and we need to keep doing it.
Completely agree, Carlos. And, you know, we did touch on that a bit on the podcast about how we have to get to a point where people are sympathetic and, you know, empathetic to these things without actually ever experiencing them and going through it themselves. So, yeah, I get your point, and it's well, you know, it's one that's very important to continue from what Steve and Jan talked about education. You know, as that's the first step, we have to also have sympathy and empathy, and you also talked about, you know, how people are catching things on camera, and those are the ones that are being discussed, but there's so many that aren't caught on camera. As I think we've probably all seen that image now with the iceberg, and, you know, the cases that have been caught are the part of the iceberg that's out of the water, but racism is what's below the water. So thanks for using your platform with the podcast to talk about this tough issue, and thanks for being a good friend to me since the beginning, Carlos. Really appreciate it.
No worries. And you know what, like, kudos to Anthony and Chris too, because, like, they were involved in this, and they were the ones also, they were as excited as I am to bring this subject to the public. So kudos to them too. Definitely.
Thanks, Anthony and Chris as well. It's my pleasure to introduce another one of our super fans. I think everyone knows her from her son, Chris, who was kind enough to be part of the podcast yesterday, where she sits in 104. I think she started a little gang, the Fanny Pack Gang, among other groups at the Wanderers grounds. Missy, I really want to thank you for coming on and everything that you've done at the Wanderers ground to unite a lot of different people. So please tell us where you're from, how you're connected to the club, and how the past week has affected you personally.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I totally appreciate it. Well, where I'm from, I'm actually from New Brunswick. I am a military brat. That's what we call ourselves. And so I grew up overseas in Germany. And then we came to Canada and subsequently ended up here in Halifax, my dad's final posting, and we stayed here. And I I didn't experience racism in Germany, as most people would probably think I would have. I experienced it when I moved here. And so it hurts the heart. Actually told myself I was not going to break down.
No worries. It's understandable. It's a tough topic, Missy. Feel free to take a minute if you need it.
So this past week has been unreal. I told myself I wasn't going to watch the video, and I only saw pictures at first. And then I watched the video, and to watch somebody expire while another person looked on like it was just like killing an ant. I felt like I was being intrusive, invading this man's last moments, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm watching this, and millions of other people are watching this, and what's going to come of it? And I didn't think that it would get to where we are today. And I think if we weren't in COVID, it wouldn't have this response. I think if we were all still working and everybody is going about their day, it wouldn't have had this traction. It would have been the same as any other killing. And I say killing because, but this George Floyd's death has become a catalyst. And, the last 3 days I've been getting DMs of people apologizing to me, and I'm saying, you don't have to apologize. You didn't do anything to me. And it's just that people feel bad because they just didn't know, they didn't understand. And so I've been telling some of my stories of racism and, not getting job promotions, not, like you said, you work, 3 times harder, and it's, you ask for the raise and it's, just wait for it. And it's to the point where you don't wait anymore.
I think that's important to mention, what you just
Yeah.
said there is really important. I think we've waited enough, Black people have waited. Your dad, I'm sure this is probably something he's been dealing with his entire life and most of your entire life. So
yeah, he's exhausted. He's almost 80 years old, and he joined the military at 17. Now 17, the second African Canadian signalman in Canada, and overseas at 20 years old, plunked into situations where he was, of course, the only Black man, and just, racial comments just thrown at him. My uncle was in the Canadian Navy, put in prison in Alabama because he was walking the streets like you would when your ship went to shore, and having to be taken out of prison by the Canadian military police, and being treated like an animal and not a human being. This is the 60s. This isn't the 30s or the 20s. It's the 60s. And my husband is white. We've been together for 32 years, and still 32 years later, we'll go out to a restaurant and people will look at us. And it's like, seriously? Like, come on, folks. This is 2020. My money's green or purple or blue, whatever Canadian money is. And I bleed red. Like, it's a sorry state. It's a real sorry state. And like you said, about 104, we're a cute little family. of, you know, of people in the beginning, of course, of the game starting. You didn't really know who you were sitting with. And then we all started to learn and know something about everybody around us, where everybody's from. We have, you know, Francophone. We have just this really cool mishmash of millennials and old folk. And we're having a really great time. And we had one episode this year of somebody who, because somebody sold their tickets because they couldn't make the game, so a random person bought the tickets. And I'm not saying the player's name because it's not fair to him. And these people, I almost used gentlemen, but that's too kind a word, made gorilla sounds and told him to smile because they couldn't see him on the pitch. And I was like, did I hear that correctly?
Wow.
And I just put my hand on Daniel's lap and I turned around and I did the Missy side eye. And, you know, I don't know if they didn't realize I was in front of them. I'm not sure, but I put them in check just by a look. And I think they knew because of the collective around us that we're a very tight 3 rows of people that they would have been in trouble. And that's really awful. You're supposed to be there to watch a game.
Yeah.
And if you are going to make comments like that this year, if you rent those seats and you're behind me and you make those comments, I'm calling you out.
Mhm.
I was trying to be good last year. This year, I'll call you out. It's
Yeah.
all of it, you know.
It's important. It's important. I think one of the things I discussed with Derek and the team right away, Zoom was one of the first companies to have a diversity officer, and I've been looking, researching what that means. And one of the things that I've read so far is a diversity officer is really somebody who just kind of addresses all these things that happen in an organization, and with us, the Wanderers being an event-based company, during a game like that, if something happens, it's just giving direction for people to actually voice and say what happened. So you can have somebody who it's their job to address these issues and take it to the next level. So, that is something that we're looking at. We're not saying that specifically that's their main job, but that is going to be part, I believe, of what the diversity officer will be doing. And just know that the Wanderers are looking to have rules in place that address things like that, so
Right.
that we don't have people experiencing that at the Wanderers grounds. And
well,
thanks
yeah,
for sharing.
It comes down to even your ushers just having unconscious bias training, so that when something like that happens, it's a simple wink and a nod. This is what's going on over here. Come out of the stands, let them know what's happened, and
And if you guys, any of you guys, I'm seeing some stuff in the chat there. If you guys have other recommendations, we'll start with just send everything to info@hfxwanderersfc.ca. Any resources or anything you have or any suggestions, and we'll do our best to kind of look through those and see if there's any things we can do. I'm not going to say we're going to do something on everything, because again, I'm just
no, we're going to do something about that. Yeah. So Missy, we'll look into that. We'll put something in place for the next time we're in the stadium, that stuff like that, which is bullshit, can get reported and dealt with, and we can find out who bought those tickets and they don't get to come back.
Well,
Thanks,
like I said, they never ended up behind me again. I don't know, if they ended up anywhere else in the stadium, but they never ended up behind us again. And it was really, because last year was flipping amazing. The vibe in that stadium, the mix of ages, of races, like it was a fabulous group of people that your organization has brought together to experience something new and exciting. And I think you guys are doing a fabulous job. And I think by bringing in these amazing young players from all over to mentor our children in our community, to actually see players from, you know, from other countries who are speaking French but they're from Africa. They're not speaking French from Canada. You've brought a really great diverse team into our children's lives, and I totally appreciate that. And the language that you use and portray on your social media platforms is phenomenal. And I really think you guys should, you know, just keep doing what you're doing. It's not broken. It really isn't. And I totally appreciate it.
Thanks, Missy, for addressing that. And Derek, thank you for responding so quick, saying that we are going to take some action. That's an important one that we can do in sport, you know, especially here with the Wanderers. But there's other people, I'm sure, who are involved in other organizations. So I'm hopefully listening and taking notes. So thanks for sharing that, Missy.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We do have a lot of staff who are very, very compassionate in many ways and brilliant at what they do behind the scenes. You may have seen Danielle McNally on the sidelines at one of our games or practices. She's part of our physio team and medical team, and I'm really pleased she's also with us tonight. Danielle, please tell us a little bit about, you know, where you're from, your role with our team, and how the past week has affected you and some of the comments.
Marvin, thanks for hosting this tonight, and thanks to everyone. It's nice to kind of listen and learn from everybody else. I'm Danielle. I'm a physiotherapist. I've worked with the team last year and this year again. I'm from Wolfville. I spent most of my youth in Ontario. My dad's a Canadian football coach. So I spent, from as long as I can remember, hanging around sports teams and mostly men's sports teams and always really diverse sports teams. And that's been probably one of the, you know, that's why I'm a physiotherapist. That's been one of the greatest privileges of my life. And I feel very lucky to work in an environment that is, you know, Missy just said, you know, people speaking French, but not, you know, not from Quebec. We had, you know, 6 languages on our team last year, people from, I don't even know how many countries and different religions. And it's, I feel very fortunate to get to work in that environment. So when I think about this past week, I kind of brought back a couple incidents, and he's disappeared now, but we all spent a lot of time in airports last year, kind of waiting for our flights. And so when you just kind of hang out there, I just ended up chatting once with Jan. And if you get the chance to sit down and have a chat with Jan, he was an encyclopedia of knowledge about Trinidad and about the institution of racism in Trinidad. And I learned so much from him. And I tried to talk a little bit about, you know, Canada or Nova Scotia or even Halifax. And I found myself struggling. You know, I was talking about the community of Africville, and I couldn't remember dates and details to tell him. And I was a little bit embarrassed. And now a year later, after that conversation, I didn't go back. You know, I didn't go back and learn more. And I was struck a little bit by a text that I got from you, Marvin. We were kind of talking about this chat, and you said to me that this was something that you're passionate about, and you wish it was obvious to everybody to be passionate about it. And it kind of hit me that I was like, you know, I feel passionately about this, but do I act passionately? You know, are my actions passionate in what I do, as opposed to just what I feel? And that's what this week has kind of brought to my attention, that it's not enough to feel, you know, to treat people equally, or to feel that racism is wrong. I need to carry the burden of acting and acting passionately, and not just in a moment, in, you know, in the future going forward as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. It is tough. It is tough, Danielle. Like, you know, I think a few people have said it, that it's, you know, humans we're used to being sympathetic to things that happen to us personally, and we have personal attachments to. And the tough part of how we're going to have to get, you know, to the end of racism, we have to be sympathetic of things we've never gone through. And, you know, I think videos and, social media has really done a good job of exposing things globally that are happening, and allowing us to be more educated on such things. But I think it is more important that after the education, we look a bit more local, for action, because it is, Steve also said, I might not change racism, but I can change how I act and what we do going forward, and how we present ourselves and the people we choose in our circles. And I said it on the podcast yesterday, and I really do think it's something everyone has to take into consideration right now is, Black people are really dissecting their circles right now and seeing the people who are supporting and reposting messages and reaching out, and it's not an unfair thing for Black people to be doing, because we have to be protected in some way. And that's one small thing that I've been taught from a young age by my parents is, be careful the people you let into your circle, because your circle, really represents who you are. And I was talking to Jamie McGinnis about this earlier this week, and he said a quote that I never heard before, that, your vibe attracts your tribe. And I think it's a really great way of capturing that, we have to be aware of the people around us, and that people read us from the people that are standing next to us, standing in front of us, standing behind us. And so thank you really for, being brave, because that's what you're being by willing to talk about this. There's a lot of friends who I know feel the same way you do, but it's tough to talk about. And I'm not saying it's wrong of them not to, but I know it is brave of you to be here to speak about it. And I appreciate you and others in the organization who weren't able to be on the call, because we did want to make sure that we were, remaining true to the word inclusive and including, a female, a male, and the various ethnicities. So really, I really can't thank you enough for reaching out and wanting to be a part of this conversation and the greater solution.
Thank you.
With what you said, just moving a little bit more, what do you think sports teams, fans, physio like yourself, are responsible for doing moving forward now that the conversation is being had?
Like I said, I mean, sport has been the greatest privilege of my life. Like from, when I think about, Derek's kids and Matt's kids and Jan's daughter that get to grow up in sport. Like I grew up in that, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And when I think of sports teams, I mean, to me, it's like this concentric circle of at the center are, our 20 players, our 23 players. They're the center and they're the core. And then there's the coaching staff. And then outside of that, there's the staff, and then there's their family and friends. And that ripple grows, and it has, the privateers group, and then all our supporter groups, and the season ticket holders, and then our fans. And when you think about our city, that ripple at this point, the 20, the core group of players has now rippled out to touch the entire city. So everybody has a connection to us in some way. And that gives us an opportunity, right? And I really was excited about when I kind of saw some of the messages in this organization, that it wasn't, there was some things to do now, but it was also what framework are we building so that this is just part of our club. And I think that's so exciting, and I feel very happy to be a part of an organization like that. That it's not, this is not an event. This is just something that is being built into the framework of this new organization. And I think that that's what sport has the power to do. Is it's a link of people together, a large group of people that are connected at its core by the players that everybody wants to see and everybody wants to hear from. And like Alex said, big or small, millions or thousands, right? They have a platform, and this group has a platform. And I think there's a lot of power in that. So I appreciate that the organization is taking on a plan, a plan of organization, not just a moment.
You said it, Danielle. You said it. I'm struggling with some emotions myself, as I can feel the passion and behind your words, and really thank you. I'm glad you're a part of the team as well. I'm going to shift to a guy who's also been with us for a couple of years now. Another fan favorite, Peter. he reached out immediately after, you know, we started the conversation, and he was very adamant that he wanted to say something because this is something that that affects all of us. So Peter, we'll start by introducing where you're from and your role at the club as well.
Hi everyone. So first of all, thanks for having me here, Marvin. I think this is a very, very important issue, and I'm very proud of this club and this community that we are taking it so seriously. And well, like, this has been very, very helpful for me because I actually learned a lot just from talking to you guys and listening to you guys, because I've never had to deal with racism myself. I can only imagine how frustrating it would be to have to deal with it. And so I grew up in Germany, obviously a country with like a very history, like a rich history of racism. And it's just like I've seen it happening, but I could never imagine like how bad it actually is. And now I realize that it's not enough to like just say, oh, like I have black friends, or like I have friends with different backgrounds, but you have to actually actively do something against it. And I see like on social media that people, like white people, saying like, oh, it's hard for us, it's a hard topic to talk about, or like it's difficult to talk about for us because it's a very sensitive topic. But I don't think it is, because you're either with it or you're against it, because there's only right or wrong in this topic, and it's clearly wrong to not support anti-racism. And I also want to say that I'm really, really proud to be part of this club, because I think football is what brought us all together here today. And I think there's no space in football for racism as well. And yeah, I just think that, you know, being a part of this league and this club, and we all show the world and the country that in Halifax and the Halifax Wanderers and the CPL, there's absolutely no tolerance whatsoever when it comes to racism. It's very important, and yeah, I just want to share that with you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for your support, Peter. And you know, you're another one of the leaders on the team, so it's great for some of the younger guys on the team to hear you speak that way, and Alex speak that way. And thanks for being a good friend. You have been from year one. Off the pitch, you've been a good guy to other kids that I've seen in the community who have asked for pictures and autographs and everything. And you've been very inclusive yourself. So thanks for everything you've done, Peter. I'm gonna give Jan a chance to say something again. He's got a couple things. So if you don't mind, Nicole, Jan.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I just after hearing Missy speak, I felt like to share a little bit more with you all, because I mean, I consider you all family, and I just don't want it to be a situation where a week or 2 weeks passes by and it kind of goes to the back of our minds and we kind of forget it and we kind of put it on the back burner. I think these problems, especially in 2020, we have to try to eradicate. This generation, or in my time in living, we actually even stopped things like even cigarette smoke. I could remember times back in the day going to the club, and you leave the club and you shake your aroma, it's just cigarette smoke, and you weren't even smoking. So I think if we could get things like that, things like racism, we should try really hard to try to eradicate and to try to educate ourselves and our peers to kind of get it done. Just going back to Hungary, I know we spoke about the youth and one of the important parts in this fight against racism is to try to educate the younger ones and to try to ensure that they are kind of brought up knowing right from wrong where racism is concerned. I had a situation, and I know Stephen I never even discussed this with Stephen, so this is probably the first time he's hearing this story. When I was in Hungary, where I was with FTC Ferencváros, which is probably the biggest club in Hungary, and we had a league derby game, another big team in Hungary. I don't want to call the name for obvious reasons. And just before the start of the game, I remember my goalpost was in line with the away fans. And the place got really quiet. Like, you could hear a pin drop. And then I heard somebody whispering behind me. So I looked around in the stands, and I saw a youngster. He could be no more than 7 or 8 years old. And someone gave him one of those megaphones, and he shouted out, "Williams!" So me, smiling, I just gave him a wave. I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Go back to Africa." And everybody started laughing. And, you know, I adjusted. The captain was a defender. He was just in front of me. He heard it as well. And I adjusted with him. He called the referee, and the referee was like, "Nah, no problem, just play on." So we ended up playing the game, and I can remember after in the dressing room, I sat down by myself. I sat there for like half an hour. Couldn't even go to the showers, and I was completely in shambles. After that, about 4 or 5 games after that, we ended up winning the league by probably 10, 15 points. Can't remember clearly. And I had a discussion with the coach. And he was an honest guy. He came from England. And he said to me, "Williams, I'm not sure if I'll be here next season." And I already got information from the hierarchy at the club. I had the option to stay the extra year in the club. And in those times, I was trying to get my work permit to go back to England to play. And I needed to stay in Europe for 2 seasons again. And he said, I know you want to play. I know you have that determination, that drive to play. But if I stay here next season, the hierarchy at the club, they already told me they can't guarantee you playing time, because from next year we have a new television deal, and a lot of the games will be on local television. And they simply just cannot see a black goalkeeper in the goalpost every game. And this is the reality. So when you think about, I know some people tend to think about situations where sometimes black people kind of cry wolf and they call racism when there's not really racist situations, or sometimes black people acting a fool and they deserve some of the treatments they're getting. The difference between acting a fool and racism is night and day. You could see it with your 2 eyes. You could see it, it's clear. And again, I'm not here to ask for extra treatment, extra special treatment. I'm just asking for you guys to really sit down and consider, to ensure that yourself and the people around you treat everyone the same, regardless of the skin color. That's all. Because sometimes it comes to a point of denying people like myself opportunities. When I left Hungary, if you look back on my stats, when I left Hungary, I took a hiatus from playing abroad. I had absolutely no passion to go abroad and play after that. I stayed home, I did the best that I could. And I think that is what kind of helped me to play the level that I played with the national senior team of Trinidad and so on. But I really didn't have the passion to go back outside. It left me for quite a few years after that. So again, it would be hard to see players like Tristan Borges, for example, who's gone to play in the French or in the Belgian second division, where I played as well, ended up on a team with predominantly black players, and they treat him the way that I was treated when I was in Hungary. You know, you don't want to see that. You don't want to see the likes of Peter or Christian or Scott Foot go into situations, you play in leagues like the French league or the Belgian league, where there are a lot of African players, and they are greeted with that type of racism. You don't want things like that. So when you sit down and you lose that passion, or you lose that drive to kind of act on forms of racism that you might see, think about situations like this.
And you raised a good point there. We're going to wrap this up in a moment, but I want to ask you, was that part of the appeal of Canada? You know, is that you didn't have to worry that much about racism, at least from, you know, what you had read and what you had heard? Is that kind of what part of the decision that led you to come into the Wanderers?
I can't stress this enough, Stephen. That was the main reason. But when he spoke to the composition of the team, and I think Derek and Stephen did a really good job in terms of the composition of the team. We had players, sorry, as Missy said, from Africa who were from Canada. We had Peter, a German player. We had Kodai. We had the South American contingent of Louise and Guti. I think the composition of this squad, so much so, for me, it was almost welcoming. You know, I didn't know much about Canada at the time, apart from what I've heard from Stephen Hart. But, and as I said in the podcast, just 1 year in Halifax, and just the way the people treated me, the way the people embraced the entire group, not only myself, but the French Canadians, the Kodais, the Gutierrez, you know, it's honestly one of the best places I've been in my life. And as I continue to say, Halifax is now my second home. I'll do anything for Halifax. And I think we have to not only maintain, you know, the togetherness, the love, the compassion, and the passion we have as a people in Halifax, but we have to grow. As Alex said before, it can't be a situation where there's 1 or 2% in racism. It has to go down to 0%, and it starts with Halifax. It starts with us.
Definitely agree, Jen. And thanks for giving us another example. I think that's what really, right now, why it's really important that everyone speaks up, but a lot of Black people take that lead and share their experiences with their friends and their coworkers and their communities. So it is, again, just brought a little bit more locally, and, you know, people can be a bit more sympathetic to something that's happened in their backyard than, you know, something that happened across the world. And there's been lots of great reading materials that have been suggested in the chat there. I'd like to highlight a few of them. Restrepo had one. He said, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. And he said this book not only teaches you about the origins of systematic racism in North America, but also tells the story of one of the most inspiring individuals who taught himself how to read and write in the streets of Maryland as a slave. He escaped slavery and went on to become one of the biggest abolitionists of the time. So thanks, Restrepo, for that one. And there was another one, I believe, from, just give me one moment, Frederick Douglass, which was reiterated a couple times. And Steve also suggested the writings of Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and also The Groundings with My Brother. James Baldwin, and lots of other great suggestions. So thanks everybody for putting that in there. And I think we'll try to capture some of those and have them somewhere for people to look back maybe after the call. But the main thing really want to stress is the importance of everyone who joined this call. You know, we all are taking small steps in our own lives. I'm sure I've seen a lot of you guys post about different things, from Derek to Matt Fegan to my friend Riley there from the Halifax Thunderbirds. Thanks for coming on as well and for your message of support. You know, it's tough to hear what happened with your guys' league being postponed until next year. So sorry to hear about that, but thanks for your support. And in closing, you know, thanks everyone for coming together from a ways and to discuss how we can continue to build on the strong, diverse community that we already have at the Wanderers grounds in Halifax and Nova Scotia, and to discuss how we can make sure we continue to encourage anti-racist behavior as we address, not just to acknowledge that we're not racist, but to encourage anti-racist behavior and practices within our clubs, within our society, within our organizations, within our businesses, within our social circles, in everything, in every facet of life. There's nowhere that we can't improve on being more inclusive. And even though, again, Black Lives Matter is the trending topic right now, this is a bigger conversation about, you know, minority groups. And there's many of them in the world. There's many of them in Halifax and Nova Scotia. But please let us know if you have any other suggestions outside of what we discussed today, or you want to follow up in any way. Again, I said info is the easy one, but you have our other methods of contacting us. Thanks to everybody. you know, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. Just another quote to close, but this is a great start, guys, and let's not let this momentum end after this call, and let's continue to come together for Moes. Thanks, everybody.